Hi there, Steve Kaufman here at Steve's Cafe. Remember, if you don't like me talking about things political, and you want me to talk about language learning, then go to my Lingo Steve channel. Otherwise, this is where I rant on whatever catches my fancy. And today I'm going to talk about critical thinking and dialoguing. The reason? Because I saw a tweet. I follow different people on my Twitter account. I follow educators, and they were talking about the importance of teaching critical thinking. And I must say that, and there's another concept that I came across here in Vancouver called dialoguing, and Simon Fraser University has a center for dialoguing where they teach people how to dialogue, how to communicate with respect and respecting diversity and all of these things. And there's something within me that objects to both these terms. I object to the idea that teachers are going to tell people how to think and how to communicate. And my experience with critical thinking, while I was on a listserv, which is like a forum of English teachers, and when they talked about critical thinking, it was mostly about how they could get their ESL students, English language students from, Honduras or Nicaragua or Afghanistan, to challenge the system more. In other words, to recognize that there were power relationships and they were being abused in some way or whatever. One guy even insisted that all of his students basically lobby the state government, this was in the States in his case, the state government for more funding for English language instruction for immigrants. So that, again, it's this idea of teachers directing the minds of students rather than just teaching them English. And it wasn't obvious to me that, say, an immigrant from Honduras, who undoubtedly has had to deal with a lot of different situations in her or his country, would benefit by being taught how to think by some English teacher. It also comes up very often when we consider, there's often this contrast between sort of Western thought, which is supposed to be more based on challenging things and being, call it more logical, whereas the Asian, whatever, Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, are meant to be more group-oriented and more go with the flow and don't challenge things logically. I don't believe that, really. I think people tend to think, and what they think and how they think is a function of, to some extent, what they know, and also a function of their identity, what's important to them. And if people were really so rational in Western countries, for example, in the United States, we wouldn't have such a large amount of support for Donald Trump. And obviously a certain group of people, regardless of how stupid he or however many ignorant and impolite and impetuous and ridiculous things he says, they continue to support him. It's not critical thinking that's at play here. It's their identity. It's a bit like, again, in Russia, where the government basically is running their economy into the ground, engaged in very expensive, call them geopolitical adventures, and spending a fortune on propaganda when they have, declining quality of health care, schooling, and you name it. And yet, at a level in their identity, they identify with this. And so while they understand that a small number of people are making out like bandits, while there is a lack of money for, government pensions and hospitals and so forth, it doesn't matter. It's so critical thinking is not what matters the most. So in that sense, to imply that somehow an English teacher has a unique ability to teach critical thinking to a student of English, I don't buy. And in fact, critical thinking means you must have the same attitude, this sort of critical attitude towards problems as I have. And if the student has a different attitude, probably the critical thinking teacher will say, no, that's not right. You're not thinking critically because you don't agree with me. Similarly with dialoguing, I went to their website, Simon Fraser University Center for Dialoguing, And it's this thing about finding consensus and being respectful and harmony in all of our communications, which sounds like a good idea. But again, I don't like that, because if I don't agree with you, I'm going to tell you. And people can agree with me. Disagree with me. Although some people here, their comments are usually along the lines of, you stupid, old, white, conservative, idiot, whatever. Some of those. No, I wouldn't say usually, but you get some of those. Or if I criticize Justin Trudeau, someone says, oh, you must hate him. I don't hate him. I just don't happen to like his policies. I'm not carried away by Justin Trudeau. But I don't hate him personally. I probably like him. If he came to dinner, we'd have a great time. Probably. Anyway, but dialoguing. So the idea is that, we're going to find this common ground and stuff. So I was, for whatever reason, a friend of mine was going to this function organized by Simon Fraser University where we're going to dialogue about stuff. And so they organized us around tables, and then the student of the Center for Dialoguing explained to us, ordinary citizens, that now we must learn to dialogue. It's this new, better, more productive way of communicating, and respect and harmony and all the rest of it. So we sat around a table and we were engaged in this exercise of writing down random thoughts in response to questions and stuff like that. And then the student who was sort of chairing our little table would summarize. And we were talking about multiculturalism. And just about everybody at our table, most of whom were immigrants, said they really want for themselves and their children to assimilate into the Canadian mainstream. That's what they all said. But the student there, she wrote down, we all think it's really valuable that in Canada we have multiculturalism which respects, the diversity and all this stuff, which is fine to have as an opinion, but that was not the summary of the views at our table. And then subsequently at lunch, I sat down with a student who had harangued us on the importance of harmony and respectful communication and dialoguing. And so we were talking about multiculturalism. Now, I have the view that whatever people do privately, whatever religion they profess privately, whatever languages they're interested in privately, whether it be the language or culture of their heritage, call it, or whether it be some other culture or language, that's entirely up to them. But that in a country like Canada with so many immigrants, we shouldn't be encouraging people to be different. We're not going to force them to assimilate, but we should at least make the things that we have in common, and that includes a lot of things that were there before the immigrants arrived. The way we communicate, our languages, our sports, different customs, we should make that as attractive as possible so that immigrants actually want to assimilate. Not force assimilate, but assimilate, as has been the case with my family, with many of the people I know. They're just happy to be Canadian. So I more or less explained this to him. I mean, this guy, when he heard that, he sort of attacks me, you bigot, how can you say that, blah, 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 blah. And here's a guy who probably speaks one language, has a very limited knowledge of the world, of history, but he's been given this very small amount of ideology about diversity and multiculturalism, which is fine. He can have his point of view. But having lectured us on dialoguing, to then jump at me with accusations of being a bigot, to me again demonstrates that dialoguing in effect is a code word for saying we must all agree with the established politically correct position. And I volunteered. In fact, there was a student at that Center for Dialoguing who was also didn't like the way the sort of groupthink, force think, politically correct atmosphere. And so I said, I'll come up and give a talk. And when I was up there talking to the students, it was obvious that the majority of the students, I would say 60% of the students, but even more so the professor, were not about respect for other people's points of view, but imposing the correct point of view. So when I hear the words critical thinking and dialoguing, I tend to be a little skeptical. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.